Shall we start?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody and thank you for joining us. This is the PCCB event roundtable discussion on capacity building for enhancing resilience at the local level. For those of you who are familiar with the PCCB, the Paris Committee on on Capacity Building, they organize a capacity building hub at the Conference of Parties every year for the last few years, which we have, my center ICCCAD has had the privilege of collaborating with them at the hub. Under normal circumstances, without the COVID-19 pandemic, we would be in Glasgow now doing this as a physical event at the capacity building hub. But unfortunately, because of the pandemic, the COP is postponed for a year. But nevertheless, we are using this opportunity to do a series of virtual events. And today's event is going to be on capacity building for enhancing resilience at the local level. I will invite my colleague Mahmouda to share a little bit of Mentimeter getting to know people, getting to know where you're from. Mahmouda, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, hello everyone, it's Mahmouda. I am working as a research officer at ICCCAD. So I'm going to share a Mentimeter link in the chat box. You can also grab your phone or open another screen and go to menti.com and enter the code to get the link. So just let me to share the Menti. Just give me 1 second to share the Menti link. Yeah. So here is it. So
I hope everybody is familiar with how to use Mentimeter. Mahmouda, please give instructions.
So you can just open a screen where you can type menti.com. Then you have to put the code 7038001. Please let us know if you face any kind of problem. So would you like to go through the answers? We are already getting a lot of answers there.
Very good. So we are actually covering quite a large geographical area from Bonn to Bangkok to London to Copenhagen, Georgia, Rotterdam, Washington, DC. They must be very early in the morning there. Beijing, Dhaka, New Delhi, Scotland. It's a pity we're not in Scotland now, but nice to have Scotland represented here. Tokyo, very good. So I think we've got a very good geographical coverage of the whole world here. Please feel free to put your details in the chat box if you want to share that.
So
Mahmouda, shall we move on to the next one? Yes.
Yeah, I'm going to move the next one. So the question is, what is your primary field or working field? So my work is primary in the field of what? Wow, capacity building.
So we have capacity building, LGBT rights and climate change adaptation. That's a nice one. Climate finance, readiness support, solutions broker for adaptation, urban resilience is a good one. Urban poor movements, very good. Report writing for UNEP, that's an interesting specialization. Climate change mitigation, climate policy, forest management, climate change education and skills, capacity building again, solutions brokering, climate finance and international policies, youth engagement, that's a good one, WASH and skills development, local government for sustainability, that's very relevant, research and capacity building. Good. So thank you all very much. Please do continue to put in onto the Mentimeter. We'll collect them and use them for our report. But let us now move on to the next section of our webinar today. And it's my great pleasure to invite and introduce Ms. Sheila Patel from Mumbai in India. Sheila is primarily a very good friend. We've been collaborating and working for many years together. Her knowledge and experience for many, many years has been working with grassroots level communities in cities, in slums across Asia, Africa, Latin America, with the Slum and Shack Dwellers International for many years. And then more recently, over the last couple of years, she has been one of the commissioners in the Global Commission on Adaptation, and she has been focusing her attention on locally led adaptation, where I've been working with her very closely. So it's my great pleasure to invite Sheila Patel to give us a sort of grounding and overview of the topic, and then we will move on to other speakers and to the panel for discussion. Sheila, please go ahead.
How much time do you give me, Salim?
5 to 6 minutes, is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, good.
So thank you, first of all, Celine, and I want to acknowledge that you have contributed hugely for the potential connection that I can make with the work that I've been doing for 40 years with slum dwellers across the world and in India and climate change. And today's discussion about resilience has a very deep emotional connection with especially people who live in urban poverty in cities, because in the last 50 to 60 decades, their resilience challenges have been just to survive. They never know from where the threats come. They don't know who to go to find solutions. And in most instances, their asset base, however fragile it is, often gets depleted by the challenges that they face, most of whom are emerging out of neglect by the cities, by evictions, by threats of demolitions, by lack of access to amenities and services, the need to pay double or triple for everything that you and I pay for electricity, water supply, and so on. And so for me, reinterpreting the concept of resilience within climate change has tremendous transformational potential. Because on one hand, there is nobody as resourceful and with experience to understand the concept of resilience. And if we put into that mix the potential of a commitment by general society, by all of us as activists, as knowledge bearers, as technology providers, to transform not only the way in which poor people live and work and survive in cities, but to build their capacities to withstand the onslaught of climate change, which in the past also affected them, but they never identified and defined it as so. Many of them came into cities because of floods, famines, riots, both man-made and nature-based crises. And so in the concept of looking at adaptation, and as Salim and I like to say, we like to focus on the locally led part of it. It gives us an opportunity to create a demand, an expectation, and a challenge to all of us who are committed to climate change to localize the concept of adaptation, to work with communities, not on them, not for them, but with them, so that we can utilize their experiential knowledge of many generations of a resilience built for something else, which was survival. To learn from it, because many of us have not understood what survival means in real terms, but to then build on collectively new opportunities, new ways of preparing, anticipating, and learning about change that you must take on beforehand, so that the onslaught of a disastrous episode does not destroy the very basis of your life. And so for me, a very important message that comes to you from below is you must learn to work with communities. You have to support and celebrate communities that are mobilized for long periods of time, because the challenges we face have to be sustained decadally over the next 30, 40 years. And so we wish to begin now with new partnerships, new explorations of how we all bring different skill sets to the table, and we produce granular local solutions that aggregate to city level or geographical space, spatially, or national resilience. Without this, we can't do anything else. So back to you, Salim.
Thank you very much, Sheila, for that excellent introduction and reminder that the local communities, no matter how poor they might be, have a great deal of knowledge and experiential knowledge in particular that is extremely valuable in trying to design adaptation programs, and should be used and should be brought in to the picture whenever anybody else is designing adaptation actions. So let me now move on to our second speaker, who is my colleague, Professor Mizan Khan. He is the Deputy Director of my Center, International Center for Climate Change and Development here in Dhaka, Bangladesh. He also coordinates a network of universities in the least developed countries called the LDC Universities Consortium on Climate Change. It's a South-South network working on capacity building at the local level in the least developed countries. So Mizan, would you like to go ahead? You have the floor.
Thank you. I'll request Miti to upload our presentation on the screen.
Yes, it's on the screen. Go ahead.
Yeah. So can you expand this? Yeah. So I think I have just 8 minutes.
Please go ahead.
So I may have to go a little supersonic. I have 7 or 8 slides. Okay. Basically, the first slide shows that ICCCAD, our institution, is basically an action, a think come action tank, as I call it, with a sole focus on capacity building. So next slide. Yeah, and here in this slide, we wanted to share the basic philosophy of capacity building. What is our perspective? What is the lens? I will not have time to explain all these elements, but you know, all capacity building is such a capacious framework which is not given to any tight definition. So we have in the middle, you can see we have the elements of capacity building, starting from awareness to education, research and development, all those. Then we have all the levels of capacity building, starting from individual down to institution and the systemic country level. On the left-hand side, what are the types of capacities needed specifically for addressing climate change? On the right-hand side, you can see that we follow a MAIL approach, monitoring, evaluation, and learning, as well as the dimensions. That capacity building per se is not the only problem. We need to have also better capacity utilization, which many developing countries don't have, as well as capacity retention is also a problem. And on the bottom, you can see we have suggested for a 4-element framework of capacity building, where universities must serve as the central hub, with the national government serving as the coordinator. Then we have the long-term financing strategy. We have networks and collaborations. And another element is that we suggest for UNFCCC to have a capacity building mechanism, because so many agencies, even within the UNFCCC, are involved in capacity building. And in that scheme, if UNFCCC has got a mechanism, then PCCB can work as its advisor. Okay, thank you. Next slide, please. And here in this slide, you see that I just tried to share with you the vulnerabilities of Bangladesh and what responses. I will have just 30 seconds for that. Our vulnerability emanates mainly from our sandwich geographical location between the Himalayas in the north and the Bay of Bengal or Indian Ocean in the south. So all the rain and flood water must flush through our chest, and that makes us extremely vulnerable. But based on experiential learning for ages, in Bangladesh, we have turned our vulnerability to natural disasters into our strength, into a building of resilience. So we have learned to live with climate disasters. And Bangladesh is most probably one of the front-runner countries in showing a model of resilience to the world. And our leadership is extremely sensitive about. Okay, next slide, please. And here, in this slide, I wanted to share with you what kind of capacity building we do. Here, this graph, those small letters, you may not be able to read everything, and we don't have time. We do build capacity at 6 levels. We are developing a 10-year work plan for capacity building. So capacity building starts at home. For us at ICCCAD, we have a strong program of in-house capacity building. Then we have local level capacity building, which I will focus on. Then also national, regional, LDC-wide, and global. So all these level, ICCCAD is involved in capacity building initiatives, and we use at the national and local level, we have Gabeshona, a national research platform. Gabeshona in Bangla, in English it is research. So we have a research platform comprising of many universities, NGOs, government agencies. And at the international level, we use the vehicle of LDC Universities Consortium on Climate Change, as Dr. Salim has shared. It's a South-South-North capacity building initiative, first beginning with the young faculty members, and then we also work with communities. I'll share more further. Next slide. And then in 2-3 slides, we wanted to share what kind of capacity building we do at the local level. But our basic premise is, as Dr. Sheila has shared already with us, that capacity building is basically and inherently local and regional. So the utmost priority should be given to capacity building at the local level. And we think that national government's responsibility is to to serve as an enabler of an appropriate policy legal framework. Okay, and we do capacity building starting from awareness down to higher education. At our university, we have a dedicated master's program on climate change and development. And many different instruments we use, for example, learning workshops, expert training, then interactive dialogue of youth and women communities. You can move to next slides because I won't have time to explain all this. I will mention just the approaches and tools that we apply for capacity building. So we at ICCCAD, we have many different projects where the main focus is to build capacity at all levels. ICCCAD also hosts the Bangladesh Climate Services, Academy of Climate Services, where we do provide climate sensitive information to our farmers, to our fishers, and other livelihood people. So because their livelihoods and their preoccupations depend on climate sensitive information, so this is a very, very good initiative that we have taken. And then also we apply right shops. For example, during this COVID-19, with funding from little funding from CDKN, we have commissioned a story writing to many developing countries across Asia and Africa, and 22 stories have already been shared. And our purpose was to see how, at this trying time, communities cope with in such emergencies. And our basic premise was that if we can learn lessons from this, then they can also cope with the emergency climate situations. Okay, and then also we apply, you can move to next slide, then we also apply participatory community risk assessment and participatory risk assessment action plan. Then also we have, I have to show another thing, that ICCCAD has got we have signed many different memorandum of understanding at the national level with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, with the Ministry of Finance, with our External Resources Division, with the Planning Ministry, with the Local Government Ministry, focusing on the Local Government Engineering Department, which is involved at every lowest level government tiers. So our university has got a kind of a formal institutional relationship with the local governments, and in our capacity building we have we involve local government institutions very intimately. And we also, at our university, at our center, we also have a strong and active mentorship program, one-to-one. So in this program, many different government officials, NGO leaders, community leaders, youth and women leaders participate, and we provide consultation services one-to-one, and we assign them many different tasks. They study, they read, they write, and we serve as mentors. So these are the instruments and process that we use. I will focus on the last slide, Miti. So in the last slide, I have tried to capture the learning that we have gathered so far for this last decade, working with the communities and local level, local governments. For example, we have seen that communities have huge agency because they live in kind of dire conditions, so they have huge agency for doing things. What they do need is just a little support. Then we have seen that if we work with community, we can have locally driven, context-driven data, because big data for the community people doesn't serve the purpose of what they need. That is why working with communities can generate real context-driven data. And also working with communities, we got to learn not so much about the problem, because the problem they know, they face, they experience every day. But what we learn from them is about the solutions, indigenous, local, specific solutions that they provide. And then, as I mentioned, we have a strong bridge between our university and the local governments, institutional relationships. Then for these, we need really huge mobilization of networks, partnerships, and resources. And finance is a main locomotive instrument, you know. And you all know that finance at the local level is extremely poor. This poverty in adaptation finance, we have to get away with. Only about 10% of the finance goes to the local level. My final argument is that if we really do mean business with the locally led adaptation, then our national governments based on which intergovernmental system works have to be grounded down to the ground. So our national governments, through the bilateral, multilateral agencies, have to be grounded and serve the locally led adaptation, which is the key to resilience building. So thank you very much, distinguished participants. Done.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Mizan Khan, for that excellent, if rapid run through all the different activities that you are involved in. It's now my pleasure to invite the third presenter of this session today. It's Mr. Farai Madziwa, who is the team leader of the Adaptation Fund's Climate Change Readiness Programme based in Washington. Farai, you want to give your presentation now? Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Hook. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. So I also have a bit of a time constraint, and we don't have much time, so I'll try to run quickly also through my presentation, but hopefully leave you with enough information that you understand the activities that we are implementing under the Adaptation Fund to support locally led action. Next slide, please. So I'll start by I'm not sure if everyone who has joined is very familiar with the Adaptation Fund and the kind of work that we do under the fund, but I'll just give a snapshot. The fund was established under the Kyoto Protocol of the UNFCCC. It became operational in 2008, and it has a mandate to finance concrete adaptation projects and programs that benefit the most vulnerable to climate change. Now, here I underscored the concrete adaptation. It's very important and key for the fund, because by concrete, we mean the fund only finances projects that are tangible, are visible, and can be measured and verified. And then when we talk about the most vulnerable, it is the only fund under the UN Climate Convention that has a specific goal to directly address the most vulnerable communities. So I thought I would underscore that. The Adaptation Fund is a constituted body of the UNFCCC, and it has been serving the Paris Agreement since January of 2019. Now, this is important also because, as you know, the Paris Agreement Article 7 actually includes a global goal on adaptation, which seeks to strengthen the national adaptation efforts and to enhance adaptive capacity and reduce vulnerability. And this is key in that the text of the Article 7 is that it mentions also that this should be done through the delivery of support and international cooperation. So partnerships already, cooperation and supporting the delivery of capacity building is inherent in Article 7. A niche of the Adaptation Fund is that it provides funding directly to developing countries through our modality called direct access. Now, direct access is a method or mechanism that the fund uses to transfer adaptation finance directly to developing countries without them having to go through a third party. And when we say third party, usually the conventional mechanisms of transferring finance has been through multilateral development agencies or UN agencies. And under direct access, so money is transferred directly from the Adaptation Fund directly to the organization or institution located in country, which is a national organization. And this is very important and key because the Adaptation Fund was the first fund to actually pioneer this mechanism under the UN Convention. And now we know that other funds like the Green Climate Fund have mirrored this approach and also have a direct access mechanism. But the key difference in that with the Adaptation Fund, when we talk about direct access and locally led action, we refer only to national organizations and national institutions. 50% of the fund accredited entities actually direct access entities based in least developed countries and small island developing states. Through this mechanism, we have 32 accredited national implementing entities that are accessing funds from the Adaptation Fund using this mechanism. And we have 32 projects approved under this direct access mechanism. By the way, the 32 here of the projects and the 32 entities is not necessarily similar. We have actually a less number of NIES implementing projects. So it means there are some entities that have more than one project under implementation. And through this mechanism, we've managed to reach about 8.7 million direct beneficiaries and about 17 million indirect beneficiaries. And noting that the Adaptation Fund also has other mechanisms to transfer finance, which includes the multilateral and bilateral multilateral development organizations. So these numbers of 8.7 million, 17 million are obviously more when we consider the whole portfolio of the Adaptation Fund. Important under the fund also is that we have to date financed 105 concrete tangible projects. The fund has mobilized a little under $1 billion and committed about 745 million to 102 countries. And of these countries, of course, we are also very proud to state that we have about 18 projects located in small and developing states and 28 in least developed countries. I just wanted to quickly flag the portfolio of projects funded under the Adaptation Fund. We fund multiple sectors, but of these sectors, under 40%, just about 40% of the Adaptation Fund's portfolio of projects is in the agriculture and food security sector. Important also to note here is that all of the projects and activities funded by the fund are country driven. So this is not deliberate targeting on our part. This is due to the developing countries submitting proposals in these sectors. So the highest sector has been agriculture and food security. Next slide, please. Now, the fund, the Adaptation Fund Board in 2017 approved a medium-term strategy for the fund. And with this medium-term strategy, it also approved an implementation plan. And in this implementation plan, the board approved some new funding windows under the medium-term strategy. Now, the strategy is hinged upon three main pillars: on action, innovation, and learning and sharing. And there are various windows that have become available as a result under each of those pillars, and I'll quickly run through them for your information. So under the action pillar, we have a new funding window, which was approved by the board, actually in this last board meeting we just held a few weeks ago virtually, a new funding window for enhanced direct access. Now, enhanced direct access is very important, especially when we talk about supporting locally led action, because it goes beyond our conventional direct access modality, in that it gives more decision-making power to implementing entities in country to actually decide where money goes and who receives specific grants. And the board approved 20 million per year for the next 5 years of the medium-term strategy. And that would be about $100 million available for enhanced direct access. They also approved project scale-up grants, which are grants to scale up existing Adaptation Fund projects that have been very successful, and there's 100,000 per project available for that. We also have an innovation window, and the innovation window is pretty key in that it directly supports locally led action as well. Under this innovation, these innovation grants, we have small grants that are up to about 250,000 per project. And what's unique about them is that they allow institutions and entities in country on projects that are designed and developed by local communities and stakeholders to access Adaptation Fund resources without being accredited by the fund. So accreditation currently is the only way in which funds can be transferred or in a country can submit a proposal to the fund. But under this new innovation grant, that is possible without necessarily being accredited. So it really supports and goes down to the micro level to support communities. We have larger innovation grants, which are up to about $5 million per project, but these are to scale up already tested and piloted innovative practices. And then the last grant we have is a learning and sharing grant. Learning and sharing is critical when we talk about capacity building and supporting especially local action. And we have 150,000 per project that is available for projects under implementation under the fund to disseminate knowledge, best practice to internal and external stakeholders. Next slide, please. So the main delivery vehicle through which the Adaptation Fund supports capacity building is the Readiness Programme for Climate Finance. And the main goal of this program is to increase the number of accredited national implementing entities, bearing in mind that the national implementing entities are the entities identified by governments to receive money and work directly with local stakeholders and communities. Currently, we can only have one accredited national implementing country. And of course, as you can imagine, this increases the level of importance of this national implementing entity. And then the second goal is to support overall capacity of the national implementing entities, thereby supporting local capacity. And there are two main activities that the Readiness Programme does. The first is to support accreditation. So it's to increase the number of these national implementing entities from developing countries. So in a sense, because we can only have one per country, that it means increase the number of developing countries directly accessing resources from the Adaptation Fund. And the second one focuses more on project design, development, and implementation, and going through the project cycle to support developing countries going through that process. Next slide, please. And essentially the function of the Readiness Programme under the fund is kind of fourfold. The first thing it does is we deliver grants. We have grants that are available under the Readiness Programme to support capacity building, things like environmental and social safeguards, gender, and other technical assistance grants. We support accreditation project preparation, as I've mentioned, through workshops. We do a lot of regional and global workshops, trainings, country exchanges, South-South support, and the like. And we also importantly contribute to the knowledge management function of the fund. So through interaction and with the developing countries, and because particularly a lot of our activities are really country driven and have kind of like a bottom-up approach, this generates a lot of knowledge and information that feeds into the overall knowledge management portfolio of the fund and helps us to be more effective and efficient. And also it contributes to visibility of the fund. And this is very important because, for example, we know that in some parts of the globe, the Adaptation Fund is not very well known. So through our readiness activities and all the workshops we are holding globally, face-to-face, of course, outside of the pandemic, we create visibility and branding of the fund. Next slide, please. An important activity we do under the Adaptation Fund is hold an annual seminar, and this is closed to only the accredited national implementing entities. So we invite developing countries to different regions of the world. And this is very key in capacity building. If you understand capacity building, it is a lot about relationship building, relationship management. And countries need that face-to-face interaction and exchange with people from other parts of the world. And the importance of this annual seminar is twofold. One, of course, it facilitates experience sharing, knowledge exchange and learning between the national implementing entities themselves. But more importantly, it's an opportunity for the Adaptation Fund to feed in information from the international level, what's happening in the COP negotiations, policies that are under development under the fund, new board decisions and the like, to translate this information and share with the implementing entities to support their project formulation and operations with the fund. And this picture, of course, is we had the last one last year before the pandemic in Antigua and Barbuda, and the building you see behind there, the group of people, is actually a building that they retrofitted and restructured to be one of the shelters to support disaster management in Antigua and Barbuda. Next slide, please.
Thank you.
Now, partnerships, I cannot overemphasize this. When you're doing capacity building, especially at the local level, partnerships are critical. This is just a snapshot of some of the partners that the Adaptation Fund through the Readiness Programme is engaged with. It involves different stakeholders, including bilateral, multilateral organizations, global funds. I know right now we have the Global Center on Adaptation. It's not there under some of the funds, but it's a partner that, of course, we are looking to also engage and partner with to advance adaptation. Next slide, please. And one of the key things we have done under the Readiness Programme is lead on establishment of this community of practice. Just going back to the partnerships that I mentioned, this is actually a community made up of national implementing entities under the Adaptation Fund and direct access entities under the Green Climate Fund that have come together to form this community of practice. It's totally driven by the community. The Adaptation Fund is an observer when it comes to this community of practice, but it's really unique in that we are letting them drive the agenda and set the agenda for capacity building, their own capacity building. It's taken a couple of years to get where we are. Now the community has an action plan. It's established a committee with a chair and it's got a governance charter. But I can tell you this has taken a number of years, initially being driven by the Adaptation Fund. And then we brought in the African Development Bank. We had a conference with them in South Africa, supported also by the African Development Bank. And then the Green Climate Fund came in. And now it's a joint venture between the Adaptation Fund and the Green Climate Fund. But we have agreed as the two funds just to be observers and let the entities in developing countries set the agenda, set the action plan, identify what areas of capacity building they need. And the key thing we have done there is just commit to supporting that action plan in those activities. And I'm mentioning this because it sounds very small, but if you understand how multilaterals work, it's not so easy to commit resources to an agenda that has not yet been clearly defined and with set priorities. But this is a key achievement in a joint venture between the GCF and AEF. Next slide.
Very
please.
good.
And another thing that we're doing under the Adaptation Fund to support capacity building is also a partnership we have established with PCCB and CTCN. And this is essentially a three-way partnership to promote a coordinated approach to capacity building, delivering information and raising awareness on the available capacity building from different organizations through the development and generation of a bulletin. We are now down to our 4th issue of the bulletin, which should be out in December. And this bulletin provides information from the different partners and organizations that are participating in this network and in this bulletin about the support that they have, how it can be accessed, and who to contact, and so forth. And it involves a number of UN agencies, Pacific Forum, Secretariat, and multiple agencies that are involved in this bulletin. Next slide, please.
Thank you.
And the last slide that I have is just to mention that one of the things that the Adaptation Fund has started doing is developing these publications or studies. And these are important. One study we have done recently is the study on readiness and capacity building under the Adaptation Fund. And we looked also at the Green Climate Fund and the GEF. That also, well, the GEF used to have direct access as well, now it doesn't. But they are important in that it gives us an opportunity to also analyze what's going on in the field of supporting locally led action through capacity building. This study includes lessons learned and recommendations. Some of the lessons we've learned are that capacity building is about relationship management and building. Providing clear and consistent information is critical to countries. And also it looked at the merits of workshops and learning and knowledge exchange, that they are very key and very important. This is some of the feedback we were getting back from developing countries. Some of the recommendations have included the greater need for financial resources to developing countries, increase in adaptation financing, and also the need for global coherence. And more inclusion, of course, of civil society in the capacity building process. We have another publication specifically looking at locally led adaptation. And this is looking at what the fund has been doing, supporting locally led adaptation. We've got a number of projects in different countries, including South Africa, Costa Rica, Micronesia, Uganda, Cambodia, which are flagged in the study, and they're case examples of some of the things we've been doing in locally led adaptation. And lastly, the fund, of course, has a policy. It's got a policy on gender, and we have a publication on that, looking at some of our projects that have mainstream gender into adaptation, supporting local action, and the like. So I'm very happy to answer one or two questions, bearing in mind time. And
thank you very much, Farai. I'm afraid we're not going to have time for questions, given the time constraints that we have. So this now brings us to the next section of our program, which is a panel discussion. I'm going to introduce very briefly the panelists and ask them to expand on my introductions when they speak. And I will hand over to Farai to moderate this part of the discussion after I've introduced our speakers. So the first panelist will be Jae-Ing So, who is the Program Director of the Global Center on Adaptation, which Farai just mentioned. It's a relatively new center headquartered in the Netherlands, but is a global center. We will hear from her. And then we will hear from Mr. Komlan Medard Uinakonan. I hope I pronounced that right. He's a member of the Local Communities and Indigenous Peoples Platform of the UN. and he will be associated or accompanied with Ms. Andrea Carmen, who is also the co-chair of the Local Communities and Indigenous Peoples Platform, LCIPP. And then we also have Mariam Devidze, who is a specialist on environmental change program in the Green Alternative in Georgia. And we also have Sarshen Skorji, who is the Director of Policy and Fiscal Instruments at Conservation South Africa. And last but not least, we have Imani Kumar, who is the Deputy Secretary General of ICLEI and Executive Director of ICLEI South Asia. ICLEI is the Association of municipal governments, cities and towns all over the world, and they work very much at the local level in municipalities. I'm now going to hand over to Farai to ask the panelists to speak and then ask them a few questions to stimulate some discussion and take over from now. Farai, please take over.
Thank you, Dr. Hook. And well, I guess I wear a second hat, and
Yes.
I'll be moderating this session. So I would essentially like to ask the panelists if they can turn their videos on, if possible, so that participants can see them. And we would like to, in the beginning, get an understanding of who our panelists are and the kind of work they're doing in their organizations. So I'd like to start with Jae-Young. Jae-Young, if you could perhaps in a few minutes, just tell us about the GCA. As Dr. Hook mentioned, I understand that it's a relatively young organization, and tell us what kind of work the GCA is doing to support capacity building and locally led action.
Thank you very much, Farai, and it's a real pleasure to join all of you in this very important discussion. GCA, the Global Center on Adaptation, was established 2 years ago under the auspices of the Global Commission on Adaptation to carry on the work of adaptation by changing the scale and momentum for how adaptation is implemented throughout the world. Our business plan 2020 to 25 identifies 5 key program areas where the center believes that we can have some impact. These 5 areas are food security, water security, especially in the context of urban resilience, using nature-based solutions for infrastructure, climate finance, and building youth leadership. However, we feel that none of these areas can succeed without having locally led action as a very strong cross-cutting focus throughout each of these 5 program areas. And we're really delighted that Salim is working with us as the senior advisor to really think about how to detailedly incorporate locally led action in each of these 5 program areas. However, we think that locally led action is even more important than our own business plan. And so with the recent opening of the Global Center on Adaptation's office in Dhaka, Bangladesh, we are establishing the global hub on locally led action. And the purpose of this global hub is to really support all the institutions and organizations that are working on locally led action, to disseminate the best practices in locally led action, and to provide the support capacities, including finance, capacity building, as well as advocacy and increased awareness of locally led action. So we're really delighted to participate in this discussion today and have a couple of points on already identified issues that I will bring in the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jay. It sounds like the GCA has already hit the ground running and doing quite a lot already. May I ask Medad from the Facilitative Working Group on Local Communities and Indigenous Peoples Partnership to also introduce the LCIPPP and the work that it is doing. So Medad, over to you.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. On behalf of Facilitative Working Group of local communities and indigenous people platform. I want to thank the organizer for the invitation to be part of this important meeting. Local communities and indigenous people play an important role in finding climate solutions. These solutions are not only relevant at the local level, but also at the global level. At the same time, the full and effective participation in the UNFCCC process has yet been full materialized. For that to happen, it is for funding, capacity building, and other process to further enable and facilitate the participation and organization and engagement in the climate change regime. The local communities and indigenous people platform is an inclusive and trusted space. It brings together people and the knowledge system. It also brings together positive value to build a climate resilient world for all. The local communities indigenous people platform has a free function and capacity for engagement in one of these. We are currently implementing a number of activities, including organizing training workshop, webinar, and annual thematic training workshop. Developing thematic training materials and getting them dissemination. Developing recommendation on the participation of indigenous people and local communities across the UNFCCC process. This will be considered by the Substar. Thank you for the time, and we look forward to answering important questions this today. Thank you very much for all.
Thank you very much, Meda. Thank you very much for those words. I'd like to move over now to Andrea Carmen from, actually not to Andrea, to Mariam Devisa, sorry about that, who is from the Green Alternative in Georgia. So Mariam, if you can also say a few words.
Yeah, sure. Good day, everyone. Thanks for inviting us to this amazing event. As Mr. Ferrai already mentioned, Adaptation Fund, I would like to also add that Adaptation Fund has valuable commitments to the Global South countries for enhancing their capacities to adapt to climate change. Green Alternative is core member of Adaptation Fund NGO network, and we are observing the projects which are financed and supported by Adaptation Fund. Adaptation Fund NGO network has more than 250 associate CSOs, mainly from developing countries, and the aim of the network is to ensure that the most vulnerable people and communities are benefiting from concrete adaptation actions. Representing the network, Green Alternative mobilizes comments and feedbacks on Adaptation Fund project proposals, conducts independent assessments of Adaptation Fund projects and the implementation, strengthens the knowledge on the fund to the civil society organizations, and so on. And except this, we Green Alternative promotes establishing the principles of public access to information and decision-making process in Georgia. We are targeting large-scale development projects with detrimental environmental and social impacts. And in each project or policy campaign, we combine the campaign work with the capacity building of local groups and facilitate their direct involvement in the campaigns depending on the communities and their needs. We also usually conduct studies and organize face-to-face meetings with locals to identify their needs and concerns regarding the projects. And we inform locals about the planned project and their rights, existing complaint mechanisms, and so on. Also provide support for preparing complaint or any activities they need. And they need our assistance in. So I can proudly say that with varying degrees of success in all cases, Green Alternatives involvement has brought changes to particular projects and policies, and I hope it will be continued.
Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you for that. And now Sachin from Conservation South Africa, if you can in under 5 minutes as well, tell us a little bit about the work that Conservation South Africa is doing. Over to you.
Thank you very much to Farai and for everyone for having us. It's really lovely to be part of this event. Conservation South Africa works in 3 landscapes across South Africa, focused on rangeland restoration with small-scale farmers in communal areas. Our work focuses on nature-based solutions to climate change, including sustainable rangeland management, enterprise development that supports resilience for both communities and nature towards building a restoration economy. We've also been the facilitating agency in Namaqualand, our one landscape, for the Adaptation Fund small grants facility that Farai mentioned in his presentation as part of the Enhanced Direct Access Program of Work, where we supported 7 small grants recipients to develop their climate responses. These range from agriculture, climate resilient breeding, water-wise robust tea farming, to climate proofing settlements, building livestock and herder shelters, to small-scale fisheries and safety at sea, as well as savings groups. So a real wide variety of adaptation responses. We also do a wide variety of capacity building around nature-based solutions and economic development at various levels. We focus very much at the farmer and grazing association level, with working a lot with youth and women on empowerment through all areas of our work. Recently, there's an opportunity that has arisen to focus on women on farms, specifically around climate change capacity development. And then additionally, we have a strong enterprise development focus, as well as to try and develop these enterprises to be ready for commercial investment, and these enterprises also have a restoration impact and benefit. And then lastly, also working very much with our local and district municipalities on climate change. We've developed vulnerability assessments and assisted in development of climate change response planning and integrated development planning with our districts, which also aligns with our national and international priorities. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sachin. And now, last but not least, Imani Kumar from ICCCAD. If you can, in under 5 minutes, just tell us a little bit about the work ICCCAD is doing.
Thank you, Farai, for giving me this opportunity, and good morning, good evening, good afternoon to everybody. ICCCAD, ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability, is a city association all over the world. We have more than 1,700 city governments as our members. So it's a membership association established 30 years back, one of the oldest city association in the world. We have more than 20 offices all over the world working very closely with the local governments, subnational governments, and also sometimes up to the national governments, helping them on 5 pathways, like are helping the city governments to achieve sustainability to the 5 pathways. One of them is low emission development pathway. Second one is, I think some of the other colleagues are also saying that on the nature-based solutions. We also talk about circular development, we talk about resilience development pathway, and also we look into the equitable and people-centered development. So what we do is we have various programs which we work with the city governments. We do a lot of capacity building activities because we work very closely with the city government, like how the city government should address the climate change issues, how the city government should address maybe transportation, any city activity. If you talk about it, can be waste, it can be buildings, it can be transport, it can be wastewater, anything, renewable energy, energy efficiency. So all this, we have little bit of various programs what we help them out. We do training programs to the city officials so that they can implement various activities on ground and achieve the sustainability. We also have tools, as some of the other colleagues are also saying that, or also ICCCAD is really saying that we have a climate adaptation tool. We also have a carbon emission inventory tool. Actually, we are one of the first ones in the world who has come out with the carbon emission inventory tool, which more than 1,000 odd city governments have really come out with carbon emissions also on that. Recently, in the Paris Agreement, we also have launched on the financing front. If you say that, we also have a program called TAP, Transformative Action Program, wherein we are looking into the activities of the city governments and take those activities as action plans to various donor agencies, funding agencies. Is one of the, maybe on the climate fund or the adaptation fund, we can see that. So doing like some sort of a matchmaking between the city governments where there is a requirement of the funding and where the funding is available within those donor agencies on that. So this particular TAP program was very successful in the first phase. We also have launched in the second phase in 2018. And now we are looking into the phase 3 of the TAP program so that we will ask all the city governments on that. And my last point is we also work along with the communities. I think this is one of the point what in this today's webinar is we are talking about. So we do a lot of what you call stakeholder engagement. We have a stakeholder groups formed within the city government. So if the city wants to work with within the action plan, create an action plan and work on the ground, we bring also those stakeholders so that both can come together and work on the ground. So I'll just stop here and happy to answer any further questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ching. Thank you very much, Imani. Now, we have quite a diverse group of panelists. And the interesting thing, of course, is that we can already hear some common themes coming out of the different organizations. I hear nature-based solutions, finance, engaging stakeholders. So I think it's all going to be a very interesting discussion. And starting with you, Jehan, what mechanisms of finance flows have been successful to advance locally led adaptation from the GCA perspective, particularly that you've just come in as a young organization? I take it you're looking at adaptation probably from a slightly different lens to the traditional well-established mechanisms that have been there in the past.
Great. So as a way to get the discussion going among the panelists, let me identify 3 mechanisms that we see as being particularly successful. The first is that a mechanism actually exists. So we celebrate every existing financing mechanism that is helping locally led action and providing funding to local communities. So it's critical that the action on locally led action moves from discussion to implementation, and financing is a critical part of that. So the first successful component is that an actual financing mechanism exists. The second is, among the ones that exist, those that incorporate local government, especially in a kind of an existing budgetary situation, rather than in a project capacity, we see as being important for sustainability of the financing mechanism. And third, as eloquently discussed by Sheila Patel at the beginning of our session, we think it's quite important that these financing mechanisms are run on a programmatic rather than on a project-based system, because local communities exist. They're not going to stop existing at the end of the project duration. So we think it's similarly important for financing mechanisms to support local action to be also done on a programmatic basis. Let me stop here and hear from the other panelists as well.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for that perspective. Actually, in the three things, and I think you're absolutely correct that I think the first and foremost important thing is that the mechanisms actually exist, and that they are there. But I'd like to move on to Imani now, given what Jay has said, and I know that ICLEI has got this city-to-city connections that it uses as a key approach to the work that ICLEI is doing when it comes to building greater climate capacities. So what modalities do you employ under ICLEI to encourage city-to-city learning? And following on what Jayang said, could you tell us if any of the mechanisms under ICLEI or any of the mechanisms mentioned, the three things mentioned by Jayang resonate with you and the work that ICLEI is doing?
Yeah, so I think everybody is talking about action on ground. So we don't want to listen only the research, and a lot of research papers are there, a lot of information is already there. So how do we implement a project on ground? That is the important thing. Or how do you make them mainstreaming the activities what we are talking about through research or through capacity building on that. So for this particular thing, we work very closely with the city officials, city engineers, city planners, and inculcate the knowledge into their brains. Actually, sometimes the donor agency comes and asks us, can you show us something like, but I cannot show immediately because we are giving that knowledge to those city officials so that whatever the action they take up from then onwards, they can utilize that particular knowledge on that. If you talk about energy efficiency in street lighting, I can give you a simple example, like almost 20 years back when I was talking to the mayors, no mayor was interested at the time actually. No, a lot of people know about the climate change at the time also. But when I linked that to the savings, like, can you say, Mayor, if I can save you some dollars for you by giving you some ideas? So the mayor immediately brought into that action saying that, okay, Kumar, actually I have 1 hour for you, and can you tell me what I have to do it further on that? So we started talking to the mayors like that, telling them that what they should do, how they can do it. So by doing some of the actions, they can also address obviously the carbon emission reductions, but at the same time, they can save some money, they can make energy efficient lighting into the city governments and all. So those activities have progressed a lot in most of the cities. We also talked about carbon emission, climate action planning on the ground. That is another one which on the, so what we also have done that, all of us, if I say that we are all outsiders to a city government, if a city government talk to another city government and they can understand, like whatever you say, that whatever I say, that is always an external person talking to a city government. But a city engineer talk to another city engineer, they can, I don't know which language they talk about, but they understand each other. And they say that if you can implement in your city, I can also implement in my city. Thing. So that peer-to-peer learning thing between the city communities, between the city engineers has really helped to take forward the actions on ground on that. My last point, which I just want to put it, is also, in my opening remarks, what I said is the stakeholder involvement. Most of the cities in the developing countries, unfortunately, the city mayors and city administrative officers think that they're sitting on a chair, which they don't need to talk to anybody on that. But we changed that perspective within the city governments, brought in the various stakeholders, including that NGOs, local academicians, all the departments. And recently, I want to tell you this one word is called Urban Platform, actually. Where we created a platform where you have the rural people within the peri-urban areas, urban areas, and also maybe rural areas. So all those stakeholders come together and come on this urban platform, and they decide what they have to, how much water they have to give it for drinking, how much water they have to give it for maybe agricultural purpose, or how much water they need to give it for industrial purpose. So these we have tried and tested on ground, and now this I'm telling you, the urban platforms have become like a major success in Indian cities, and they're now taking it forward, and we are also giving these solutions to other Asian countries and also African. Also we were planning to show it on that. So what I want to say here is, my last word is that unless until you do that capacity building within the city governments, and also link the other actors, other stakeholders with the city governments if you want to achieve something on ground. Yeah, I hope I answered your questions.
Well,
thank you.
Yes, you did, and you raised some quite interesting points, and I want to move to Sachin to be able to respond, because so Jehan mentioned the importance of a programmatic approach, and Imani, you mentioned that it's important to give knowledge and do peer-to-peer learning. So we're kind of like looking at things holistically from a high level, but Sachin and Conservation International work directly with beneficiaries on the ground and with farmers and the like. So I'm curious to know, Sachin, what have been the greatest gaps and needs you have experienced that hamper locally led adaptation?
Thank you, Farai. It really has been an amazing experience to be able to participate in the Enhanced Direct Access program of work. And what we really found was the huge need, in addition to the climate change capacity building that went in parallel alongside the program, there was a huge gap in terms of project management and financial management for a lot of the smaller community-based organizations that actually hampered their ability to implement initially until that capacity building could be significantly enhanced. So what we found is we were able to still develop the capacity around climate change, but in addition needing to focus a lot more on project development, financial management, and support and technical assistance around this throughout the program, which was not expected to start off with. And then we also really found what was beneficial in the program of work was the amount of learning exchanges. So we had a small grants facility in Namaqualand, but we also had another one, which is a semi-arid area in South Africa. We also had another one much further north in South Africa in the Lupani region. And we could learn from one another's projects. So we had a lot of inter-district and intra-district sharing and learning exchanges, a lot of reflection workshops and learning programs throughout the Enhanced Directs program of work. And we really found that beneficial to the program. So that's something that I would also feel that you need to continue on in terms of closing some of those gaps. Thank you.
Thanks, Sachin. And because Marianne is also working under the Green Alternative directly with beneficiaries, I want to pose exactly the same question to her. From your perspective, Marianne, do you see some of the things mentioned by Sachin? Are they issues for you? What are the gaps in your opinion?
Thank you, Farah. It's a really interesting question. And as I mentioned earlier that we are part of Adaptation Fund NGO network, we usually mobilize the comments on project proposals. And we see that in many project proposals, stakeholders were not consulted properly, and therefore proposals do not respond to local community needs, and their targets are not realistic. So bottom-up planning and not only consulting communities, instead to involve them in decision-making process is challenging for many projects. And I also want to bring one example of one of the project which I assessed. This was supported by Adaptation Fund, and it was implemented in Georgia. Overall, it had many positive impacts. However, local participation and the capacity building was challenging and not sustainable. For example, if this principle was kept in the beginning, this would ensure that urgent needs of local communities are taken into consideration by project developers. Also, a well-functioning grievance mechanism was also complained from locals when I was assessing the project. They were saying that this should be also part of concrete awareness raising activities. It was also interesting that locals were involved in the implementation of project activities, and they were hired to water the trees, but they stopped watering as soon as the payments were stopped for them. So this highlights the problem that this activity was not led locally, and locals didn't have ownership of this project and these activities. So even they don't know why the adaptation matters. Another thing which was this also gap and which was also mentioned by other panelists is that a lack of institutional capacity building in local governments, and this project also had this gap, and they just they invited some of the representatives of the projects, they trained them, but like implementing entity didn't focus on institutional knowledge building and ensuring embedded knowledge across authorities. And this made the municipal staff less responsive to the maintenance of this infrastructure, which was built within the project. And I also believe that local governments should be also involved in the mobilization and awareness raising activities with the locals. Such involvement would create a more sustainable cooperation between all stakeholders and ensure the maintenance of the activities and the replication of them.
Thank you, thank you. And I'm looking at the time, and I'm going to ask our panelists to try and keep the responses short so that we can cover a few more issues. Now, I'd like to ask Andrea Carmen from the Facilitative Working Group, because there are all these approaches and all mention about engaging stakeholders and the like. Now, we know that the inclusion of indigenous people is very important. Whichever mechanism is used, whichever approach is adopted. And it is key for the sustainability of any locally led action, right? So, Andrea, what specific challenges are you seeing as the Facilitative Working Group that are faced by local communities and indigenous people? Of course, with regards to raising awareness and capacity building support.
Mr. Moderator, Leosim Chaniabu Mawayaim from our Yaqui indigenous language, and my nation, the Yaqui Nation, is a desert people in Sonora Desert of southern Arizona, United States, and northern Mexico. So we're divided by that infamous border between US and Mexico. Some of the challenges, I think, also reflect some of the strengths that we can bring to the table that were recognized in Article 135 of the Paris Decision, that it is essential to strengthen the particular knowledge, practices, innovations, and methods of indigenous peoples and local communities for climate action, and that also we establish a platform to exchange this knowledge. And it doesn't specifically say that knowledge or capacity building has to flow from one to the other. It's a mutual arrangement and agreement. I think one of the challenges we have is reflected in this conversation here, is that everybody's talking about local communities, but I haven't heard until you took the floor and asked me specifically regarding indigenous peoples. And I think it's very important that everybody involved in this work recognize that indigenous peoples are a distinct rights holders constituency that have been active at the United Nations since 1977 as a constituency. And our rights are called to be respected in the preamble of the Paris Agreement, and specifically those rights are defined internationally in the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which includes the right to participate in decision-making and the right to free, prior, and informed consent regarding all programs and projects that would affect our rights. So it is a unique approach with Indigenous peoples, and I think we do have a lot to contribute. We have, as my colleague Medard mentioned, one of our 3 work areas is in the area of capacity building, but we have identified that there's not just a need to work on capacity building for Indigenous peoples in terms of ability to participate in these dialogues, even resources to participate, resources to come directly to Indigenous peoples rather than through intermediaries. But also we have a commitment to build capacity of states and NGOs and organizations to understand the unique contributions that we can bring to bear. And I think just one example that I can give, I was invited as a speaker in Abu Dhabi at the World Urban Forum this year in a panel on Indigenous peoples' contributions to building sustainable cities in the context of climate change. And one of the government representatives, who's also a representative of a tribal people, asked me afterwards, saying that Abu Dhabi was now beginning to incorporate the structural and building knowledge of the original tribal Indigenous peoples in the desert, to incorporate those into their construction of new buildings, even government buildings, and asked me if that was the case for other Indigenous peoples. And unfortunately, I had to say no. That was the only example I have really heard from. We have structural knowledge here in the desert using adobe that keeps our traditional homes cool in the summer and warm in the winter. We also understand that, for instance, the Seminole Indigenous peoples in Florida, where there are many hurricanes, their traditional dwellings, the small dwellings where they live to this day, are sometimes the only buildings that are left standing after hurricanes, because they've always lived there. And with Indigenous peoples, with our ties to pre-colonial land base, we have the seeds, we have the animals, we have the building structures that enable adaptation. And I don't think that those methods and practices are respected enough, as well as our rights to participate in the planning process, not just as recipients, but as contributors to programs that are being built, whether it's locally, nationally, or internationally. So these are some of the contributions that we can make. And I hope that from now on, people don't just say local communities, they say Indigenous peoples and local communities, because we are peoples and we are rights holders. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrea. And one thing that is affecting both local people and Indigenous people is the current pandemic. So I kind of feel like we kind of have to talk about the pandemic and in the context of climate change. And I'm going to pose this question to you, Imani, because you are working directly in cities, and we know that the pandemic has hit some cities really hard. So, you know, considering the multidimensional effects that the COVID-19 pandemic has had on cities, local communities, and Indigenous peoples, has ICCCAD continued, how has ICCCAD continued or adapted its capacity building work in that context? And Imani, I just want to reiterate, we do have a very short amount of time left, so I'd encourage you to be short, because I want to give the other panelists also an opportunity to respond, and hopefully get 1 or 2 people from the participants to ask the panelists 1 or 2 questions. So very briefly, please.
Okay, just to reiterate, maybe it's a very tough time for the local governments for the last 1 year. Like I can put it, maybe last 9 months, because they are the ones who has to deliver on ground, not the national or subnational governments. So that's the major thing what has happened. It took the local governments a longer time to adjust to the situations, because you have a closed zones, you have all the situation has changed on ground. So what the cities have started doing is understanding what they need to do at this time. I think that's one thing. I can tell you a lot of the plans, what they were thinking for the last maybe 5 years or 10 years, which are there on the cupboards. Now they have taken it out and started working on that. So, okay, I have to implement this one so that I can help the citizens to go on and do a normal life on ground on that. So the development plans have started working on ground really, thanks to this pandemic. Maybe I'll say that a lot of, I know I don't want this type of situation, but it really helped some of the cities to address all those issues, what they could not have been addressed previously. My last point, I don't want to say this, but cities still are looking for the best practices anywhere in the world. So that is what I think is the need of the hour. So anyone, I'm saying, I have few, I know that I have seen some of the cities what they are doing good, but if any best practice is available anywhere in the world in addressing the local issues, please share with us. We are happy to take it forward on that. I'll stop here.
Thank you very much, Imani. And I'm going to move over to you, Jehang, because also, you know, there is a pandemic, but we also note that the GCA has been branding itself as a solutions broker. So in that context, what is needed to make locally led adaptation and related capacity building support a mainstream investment strategy across the donor community? Because I gather the GCA also is a donor for many developing countries. And this is looking at the current pandemic period and post-pandemic recovery.
Yes. Whoops, sorry. Great, thank you. From the point of view of the Global Center, we've identified the following two issues in terms of really to make this much more of a stronger investment strategy across communities. The first is scale. I mentioned during my last remarks that it's great and we should celebrate all the existing financing flows, but there isn't enough. So we really need to be able to reach scale in terms of larger financing flows and more financing flows. So scale is something that we're really looking at. What is it really going to take to scale up? Is it a new financing flow, or do we need to expand the existing ones? So scale is very, very important for us. The second is agency. Even among the chat and in the conversations that we've had in the panelists, we talk about local communities, beneficiaries, increasing awareness, but the people who live in these communities, they already know, they have solutions. So how can we make sure that in the instruments that are designed, local communities and people have agency? They're not benefiting or receiving aid from donors, let's say. And we think that the way to do that is to clearly articulate the results delivered, as well as the bankability of these projects. So Imani mentioned this example about dialogue with cities on, what are the actual financial benefits. We know that good solutions have clear financial benefits and giving a community just 24 hours advance notice, early warning, will reduce damages by 30%. So we need to make sure that when the projects and financing flows are being developed, that we can support clear results orientation and demonstration of bankability for investments in locally led action.
Thank you for that, Jay. And following on that, because now, the good thing is you mentioned early warning systems, and this, you know, with the direct implication on the local communities and indigenous peoples. Since Mariam, you are working directly with these beneficiaries, I'd like to ask what effects COVID-19 has had on the way capacity building has traditionally been delivered to communities, and considering some of the instruments that Jayang has mentioned, are these the approaches that you would suggest for effective delivery of capacity building?
Thank you. As we see that COVID-19 pandemic affected whole scales of the project planning and the implementation, and the danger of top-down planning of the projects increased. We see that there are also delays in implementation on ground activities of the project, and many projects needs additional budgetary requirements. Also, some community participation and decision-making process are limited due to this pandemic, and also gender considerations are also noteworthy. The women's are not involved in this process as they were before, or they should be. And there are some positive notes that Adaptation Fund NGO network identified from South Africa and India, and I would like to mention here as they can be a good examples. For example, it was another alternative method of communications we established via WhatsApp groups, SMS, or wall paintings in India, for example, which was effective while the pandemic. Also, outreach and dissemination materials on COVID and how to improve immune systems was also a great example from South Africa. Additional door-to-door efforts were increased from implementing entities, and commitments from the communities increased. So I think these are great examples, and the also donors should ensure that additional costs to be spent to ensure the public participation and commitments are really sufficient, and provide standards for virtual activities as they are conducted now, and establishing good practice guides as well. And so I believe this will play important role in this process.
Thank you, Mariam. And Andrea, what have been the key concerns of indigenous peoples during the pandemic? What have they brought to your attention regarding capacity building needs? Very briefly, please. I'm aware that, by the way, we have reached 9:30, but if you bear with me, if we can just go 5 minutes over, I'd like the panelists to say one last word. And so Andrea, very quickly.
Thank you. Indigenous peoples throughout the Americas, including in the United States, have been among the hardest hit by COVID-19. And there are many reasons for these vulnerabilities: lack of access to healthcare, the erosion of access to traditional food systems. All of these aspects are areas that also impact our call to strengthen traditional knowledge and practices in our communities, which is where this has to happen in our homelands. It's not just a matter of being called attention to. My family, 3 generations of my family were sick with COVID at the beginning of June, and my grandson has lingering effects. One of our leaders in our board of directors of my organization passed away on August 31st. We are burying people every day on our reservation. The Navajo Nation is famous for the impact. So this has really highlighted the disparities faced by indigenous peoples, not just in developing, but in so-called developed countries as well. And I'd like to utilize this opportunity again, every challenge and negative experience provides an opportunity and a lesson, is our teachings. So one thing I think we have to learn is to break down this distinction between indigenous peoples in developed and developing countries, because we are equally marginalized and affected. But I will say that our traditional medicines is what cured my family, and our communities are really seeing the need, not just from climate change, but from COVID, also to re-establish our traditional food systems and our traditional medicinal systems in order to be prepared. And keep in mind, we have survived many pandemics in the past, and we intend to survive this one as well, and to utilize it to learn how to strengthen our own indigenous peoples system. Thank you.
Thank you. And Sasha, beyond the pandemic, what do you think would be a game changer for locally led adaptation initiatives?
Sorry, thanks. For me, what really became evident, particularly through the Enhanced Direct program, was the importance of building capacity at the district level to be able to support the driving and sustainability of locally led adaptation. So what this would involve is a lot of readiness for community-based organizations as well as the district to be able to implement and absorb this climate finance, but also a lot of focus on thinking about sustainability. So what we found was, working with some of these organizations, we were able to think about the short term, but it took a very different approach to start to really build in that capacity around supporting approaches into the long term. And then alongside of that, being able to build the capacity of the local municipality to be able to support long-term implementation of long-term finance. So for me, those are two really critical elements at a district level. And then something that we found incredibly inspiring during the COVID time was our youth development program, and what inspiration came and creativity came from working with the youth. Mariam mentioned about the cell phones and use of online platforms, the communication platforms that could still continue even through this pandemic. Some really creative media, photography videos that emerged about the stories coming from the youth and their relationship with the environment and with climate change through this. So we were very inspired by that, and there's been some new ideas that have stemmed from that. So that I really feel focusing on the youth and that empowerment is something to take us forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Sasha. Now, unfortunately, I think this discussion is really interesting and we could go on, but I think we are really out of time. So I would like to ask each of our panelists to give one last word of thought. It could be the way forward, or your last thoughts on the issue of capacity building, locally led adaptation, what you would like to leave participants with to carry us forward. And hopefully we'll continue this conversation in some other forums, that this won't be the last time we're talking about capacity building, locally led action, and all the things we've discussed today. So I'm going to start with you, Jae-Young. Last thoughts.
We from the Global Center on Adaptation firmly believe that investments in locally led action are bankable investments. And through our global hub on locally led action, we look forward to working with all of you to make that a reality.
Thank you. Thank you. Very concise and direct and to the point. And thank you very much for that. I'm going to move to you, Andrea. Last thoughts?
Thank you again for organizing this important dialogue. Our belief is that partnership based on mutual recognition and mutual respect is the key to responding to climate change, which is a global crisis that requires all of us as participants and partners. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mariam, last thoughts?
Thank you, first of all, for organizing this amazing event. And I believe that locally led adaptation measures are really key. They are not universal, but we have to dig these practices, and in this term, the indigenous practices and the other local practices are really important, and we have to, and other funds have to support it, and hope we will see the future that we really desire to see.
Okay, thank you very much. Imani, last thoughts?
Yeah, I support, I think I say community-led, community involvement programs with support from the governments is the next action, I think, to address any either climate change or COVID. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then last Sashin, your last thoughts, please.
Thank you. I think a word that really is just in my head coming from this event is agency. There was a comment about it, and I think we need to reflect, all of us, on how we are driving our capacity building programs and really what affects and creates long-lasting behavioral change. So I'm very inspired by all of your inputs. Thank you.
Thank you. A big round of applause, I think, virtually, since everything is virtual, to our panelists for the insightful thoughts and ideas on how we can really advance capacity building for locally led action on the ground, working with indigenous peoples, local communities and cities. And thank you very much for participating. Thank you. And we are going to close off now, and I'd like to invite the co-chair of the Paris Committee on Capacity Building, Mazena Chodo. We are having this event as part of the Paris Committee on Capacity Building, Momentum to Recover Better. So I'd like to hand over to her to give us a few words. So Mazena, over to you.
Thank you, Farai. It was a very interesting event. I'm really glad, and my thanks go to all of you, but I'd like first to thank our two organizations which are members of the PCCB network, which collaborated in organizing this event. Dr. Salim and his colleagues from the International Center on Climate Change and Development, and to you, to Adaptation Fund, and to your team. I think it was a fantastic job, and my great words of appreciation also go to all the distinguished speakers that accepted our invitation and shared their insights and experiences from their work and on enhancing resilience and adaptation at the local level and through capacity building. And also I'd like to thank all the participants who joined us through Zoom or on Facebook. And with a focus on capacity building for enhancing local level climate resilience, especially when we are taking into account the current crisis, we have been presented with a wide range of experience and views from various bodies. And I think that it goes without saying that greater coherence and coordination in capacity building by different actors at different levels will lead to better and more inclusive outcomes and to lasting impacts. And that's why it is important for us in the PCCB and in the PCCB network to encourage such stakeholders dialogues and exchanges. And before I close, let me remind you that the capacity building momentum to recover better will continue to bring capacity building enthusiasts together every Wednesday in November. And I'd like to ask you also to leave your assessment of this event. There is a message from Susan from our PCCB team in the secretariat in the chat box about that. Anyway, the next discussion in this capacity building momentum to recover better next Wednesday will be on capacity building in the virtual space. It will give us opportunity to dive deeper into challenges that come with various discussion groups in World Cafe styles, and I would like to invite everybody already to join us. And I think that's all. So please do not forget to leave your comments on this event, as in the chat box from Susan. There is a link shared. And thank you so much. And I hope we will meet again soon. Stay safe. Bye.
Thank you, and nothing more to add, and goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye,
Stay
everyone.
safe.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.